Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar series presented by Observer. My name is Helen Holmes, and I'm Observer's arts reporter on staff. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm speaking to you now from Manhattan, New York. In an effort to acknowledge Indigenous tribes, I'd like to add that I'm addressing you currently from Munsee Lenape territory. And I'd also like to describe the current imagery for all those with visual impairment. I'm a white woman wearing like a red jacket with brown hair. And I'll let each of our panelists introduce themselves in just a second, however they wish. We're welcoming three panelists currently located in Tongva territory in LA and one in Miwok territory in Marin County. But first, some background on today's event. Every year, Observer sets out to take stock of what is happening in the art industry, releasing the Arts Power 50, which is a list of leaders who we believe are taking this sector to new heights, creating new strategies to make the art world more viable, more accessible, and more equitable. For our third edition, we decided to organize some conversations with these leaders to discuss the urgent issues that are facing artists and art workers alike. Today, we are discussing the future health of the arts industry and strategies for what is needed to overcome the challenges facing artists, galleries, and museums. This afternoon, we are discussing these ideas with four individuals who've made these questions of survival in an often turbulent industry part of their lifeblood. So to get into these introductions now, Anne Ellegood is the director of the Institute of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, and is committed to focusing on the institution's goal of supporting social justice and upending hierarchies of race, class, gender, and culture. And she's also shifted the institution's focus from single artist shows to group exhibitions in order to more holistically comment on topical issues. Anne, if you'd like to take a minute to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks to the Observer and everyone there for the invitation. My pronouns are she, her, and I have short, dark hair and dark glasses.
Thank you. We are also joined by Alex Peck, the founder and director of Tiger Strikes Asteroid, a nonprofit network of artist-run exhibition spaces with locations in Philadelphia, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Greenville, South Carolina. The objective of these galleries is to generate an ethos of cooperative achievement in the visual arts. And Alex is himself an artist whose work has been exhibited both in the US and internationally. Alex, if you want to say anything else.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to the Observer for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this panel. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am currently in Los Angeles. I am Korean American male with tortoise shell glasses and a button-down shirt.
Thank you. We are also joined by Susanne Vielmetter, the owner and director of the Vielmetter Los Angeles Gallery. Since opening her gallery in 2000, Susanne has spent the last 20 years championing a roster of diverse and fascinating artists that includes Nicole Eisenman, Rafi Kalandarian, and Pope L, just to name a couple. Susanne recently opened a second space in Los Angeles and is also a member of the Armory Show's selection committee. Susanne, if you'd like to say anything else.
Hi, yeah, my name is Susanne Vielmetter, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently wearing a dark gray sweater. I have glasses and grayish, COVID grayish curly hair.
Thank you. And joining Susanne, Alex, and Anne is Karen Jenkins-Johnson, who's the owner and director of Jenkins-Johnson Gallery, a national dealer dedicated to the promotion of representation in contemporary art. Karen is also an advisor to the Museum of the African Diaspora, San Francisco, and a member of the San Francisco Art Dealers Association. Karen, over to you.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm addressing you today just north of San Francisco in Marin County in San Rafael. I am a Black woman with circular John Lennon-like glasses with a dress that's red, rust, and brown with multicolored stripes.
Thank you so much. So briefly to the audience, if you have any questions throughout the length of the panel, you can submit these questions via the Q&A option you see on your screen. And I may not be able to get to every question, but I will try to answer or get as many questions answered along the way as possible. And with that, let's get started. So my first question for all these different types of leaders in the group is, how did 2020 disrupt you? What were the biggest problems you encountered? And anyone can answer.
Well, I'll start. I'm Karen Jenkins-Johnson for people that are impaired. 2020, the disruption of the COVID-19 just drastically just like smacked us across the face. And unfortunately, we were right in the midst of a major, having an exceptional year with very good exhibitions, participating in major art fairs. We had just participated in the Fog Fair here in San Francisco in January. We had just completed the Armory Show after the shutdown occurred, and we were scheduled to do Paris Photo and then Frieze New York, and some other fairs coming up in the fall. So the revenue stream just totally precipitated downward. And so that was a huge disruption. And then what to do with our staff and rents and all that. So it was a major pondering of how to proceed.
Yeah, we had a similar experience. Well, I wanted to quickly first also thank you for inviting me to this panel. I forgot to mention that earlier. Yeah, we were really blindsided by the pandemic. We had just come back from the Armory Show, and we were a little preparing during the Armory Show because I was concerned for my staff, to get infected. And we were careful, and I made the decision, I remember when we came back, to ask the staff who had come with us to the fair to stay home for a week and to kind of stay separate from the staff at the gallery. And at the time, that seemed like crazy cautious, over cautious. And of course, 3 weeks later, it seemed not all that cautious at all. And for us, the really biggest problem was the uncertainty, because in all the 20 years that I've run the gallery, nothing like that has ever happened before. We made it through several recessions. I remember very well 2008, where things got really frightening, particularly on the financial side. But this seemed so different and so much bigger that we were immediately faced with almost a complete halt of revenue, because we were in a position where it felt you couldn't even call a collector and start any kind of sales conversation anymore. Mm-hmm. And most of all, we had to completely shut down the gallery. So we went from a fully steaming business with many employees to a complete grinding halt within 2-3 weeks. That was very frightening.
Yeah. And Alex, would you say the same?
Yeah, I mean, we were in the middle of a year-long exploration of artist-run spaces, this sort of year-long exhibition program that we're doing in collaboration with Trestle Gallery in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. So we had to shut those down. Thankfully for us, we're a nonprofit, and we also collect membership dues. So one, we don't have much revenue stream to talk about to begin with, but then two, that wasn't really affected too much because of the pandemic, since we don't rely on sales. I mean, I think for me and our organization, I think that the biggest challenge was just art just felt so small. It still feels pretty small, so we really kind of we really sort of, obviously shut down all of our exhibition spaces, things were pretty quiet for a while, you know, just to give space to our members to go protest and, you know, do what they needed to do. So like, you know, like really the art aspect took a back burner. And I feel like, you know, that's okay.
Yeah. And Anne, how has your year been feeling?
Well, I just think it's been a very difficult year for everybody, of course. I think one of our biggest heartbreaks was that we had opened a Remorton survey that came to us from the ICA Philadelphia, the first survey of her work in decades, and a project room with Anne Green Kelly, an LA-based more emerging artist. And to have to close those exhibitions a month after opening them, just so sad, because we knew and we continue to know that there won't be another survey of Remorton's work for some time. These things take years to put together, and we were the only West Coast venue. We were the final venue on the tour, so we couldn't even say that people could go somewhere else and see it later.
Right.
So I know that was you know, really heartbreaking for all of us. And then, of course, as everyone's saying, it's just this constant sense of uncertainty and not being able, both needing to make lots of plans and contingencies for this, that, and the other thing, and doing all this kind of forward thinking, and yet knowing that every decision you make, every plan you make might be disrupted or at least delayed. So, you know, I don't know, Susanne, you might remember this. I feel like when in LA, when we all went home, we all thought we'd be back at work in 2 weeks. I don't know where it came from. We just kind of made it up. And then it just kept getting pushed out and pushed out and pushed out. So all of that uncertainty and not knowing, of course, very hard on staff and on everybody.
I feel like especially within the art world and the progression of art in general, so much of success for artists, for individuals, and like the coming to fruition of exhibitions is, like you said, the process of years long cumulative effort and like escalating attention. And when everything grinds to a halt, it can undo not just like institutional processes, but like the process by which an individual artist gets noticed through a series of steps. So when you take all the steps away, it can be much harder to not only like sell art, but get attention as an artist, which sort of leads into my next question about collaboration and coming up with new ways of getting stuff out there. So the question is, at the very beginning of the pandemic, galleries took urgent action to move their sales apparatuses online, and some of these galleries took steps to share their platforms with smaller galleries who might have access to the same type of infrastructure or technology as, say, David Zwirner. David Zwirner shared its platform with smaller galleries and didn't take any of the profits. So do you guys feel that these sorts of collaborative efforts will continue? In what form? Will they evolve? Kind of an open-ended question as well.
I would like to say something to that. These collaborative efforts happened relatively early in Los Angeles. It was Jeffrey Deitch who was really kind of instrumental in creating a group webpage in which he invited all the local galleries to. It's called Gallery Platform LA, and it continues to the day. We take turns. Each gallery gets, and an artist can get featured on that platform for a week. I felt these things were very important to kind of boost morale, because there was such a palpable sense of anxiety in the first 3 months. It's almost hard to remember the magnitude of that fear and anxiety that rippled through the entire art world and through everybody who was employed in the art world and the artists. And what we, after we had recovered from our very first trauma, what we did at the gallery, one of my senior directors, Kevin Scholl, actually came up with the idea. We started a series of exhibitions of our art installers because of all the workers in the art world, I think, that were hit the very hardest were the art installers, because that is really something that you cannot do remotely. Everything else at the gallery, the first 3 months, we were frantically shifting all the gallery work as well as all our conversations with our audience. We tried to shift that into the virtual realm because it couldn't happen in real life anymore. But the art installers really are the ones that cannot work remotely. So we felt that was where the most urgent help was needed right in the beginning. Things shifted then once the protests started. We got much more active in that regard too, but that was our very first action, and it's here to stay.
Well, Jenkins-Johnson Gallery here in San Francisco, we are housed at a place called Minnesota Street Projects, which the Rappaports started about 5 or 6 years ago in response to increased rent here. It houses 10 galleries, and we actually just joined that group in November of 2019. And so it was very serendipitous and very, actually, as Susanne was saying, it helped minimize our stress to be in association with 10 galleries, with Deborah and Andy helping lead the galleries. So there was a collaborative effort in that we put together a summer exhibition that opened up in May, and in April and May we were planning and heading toward that as a group. So that was another calming effect for us. So we could see potential revenue streams coming from that. And another new initiative that we just started with that we'll be participating in November is 8 Bridges, which is 8 galleries here in the Bay Area that for 1 month will be exhibiting whatever their platform is of artists at that time. And so that is collaborative. And that too is region specific. So it helps us see and uphold the arts community here in the Bay Area online. And another shift that we had to do was my gallery was very reliant upon, which a lot of galleries at the time is, on art fairs. And with the art fairs being canceled, that was a shock to our systems. And so we had to quickly adopt to the virtual viewing rooms. So Jenkins-Johnson Gallery, we had to change our website provider to a provider that actually had virtual viewing rooms. And so we're doing that currently.
And that was an incurred expense too, right?
That was a huge expense,
yeah.
But we knew we had to do it. So that helped focus the staff and keep the staff's anxiety down. But the other thing, and I don't know if this is a section to talk about this, is the payroll protection program. We were very much having 2 companies. I had to apply twice for the PPP and under the CARES Act. And we were successful in getting that one company earlier than the other. And that helped my staff. I mean, everybody was on pins and needles. And knowing that I told my staff that nobody was going to be let go. So we're a family. We work together as such when you have this kind of business, and then letting the artists know what was forthcoming so that they could expect some potential sales or have opportunities to make sales was also extra special. I think people are really being creative in their collaborative issues and dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, and it's as you said, very important to the best of your ability as the director of a gallery to ensure that everyone involved in your organization feels as secure as possible, given the circumstances, and can feel materially protected. Which for my next question, it actually sort of harkens back to something Alex said just a little bit earlier about art feeling small in a time like this. And I wanted to ask, in the midst of a year like this, what are some of the most effective ways to draw attention to art? And I think some of the panelists have been talking about this already via collaboration and via, solidarity. Like, those are ways to, communally focus on art. But I wonder if anyone else had any examples.
I could say something to that. We learned that, I mean, we're all aware that art doesn't take place in a vacuum. And in a time like this, I think it is even more important that we as gallerists in particular are the kind of communicator between what the artist does in their studio and what's happening in the world. And I have always felt that that was the most important role of the gallery, a kind of translating a visual event into a kind of language or event, or giving context for the work. And we felt that in our ability to contextualize, or to for what we were presenting at the gallery, for that to bring that into a relationship with the huge changes that were happening, or that are still happening in our everyday reality. That was a successful approach. That I felt was at the fundamental basis of what needed to be done. Right. Physically, that translated much more into a shifting, pretty much a very large amount of the work, and the work that we present into the non-physical realm, because we are still not able to open our galleries to the regularly. We are still only open by appointment, so we can only entertain a fraction of the people who used to come and see works in the flesh at the gallery.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we were really thinking about how, you know, because the whole art world made this shift onto social media like right away, you know, and all these viewing rooms popped up, and it just felt like a very kind of passive experience for the viewer. So we tried to figure out ways in which to bring something physical, albeit like, you know, somewhat reduced or somewhat like imperfect, into the audience's home. So we started this project called TSA PDF, which are these printable exhibitions. So basically the idea is that you get a PDF with some image files, and you can print them out on your home printer, and you hang them up in your home or outside or on a hike, or there's all sorts of really inventive solutions that people have come up with.
Nice.
And we had a really good response to that. You know, we were able to engage our audience in ways that we couldn't, because we could, before we had, you know, these 4 exhibition spaces, and only the people that could travel to those places could see art in the flesh. But in this way, we were able to engage with our audience that was, you know, out of the country or in different parts of the United States. And sort of from that experience, sort of tangentially happening, we had some of our groups there were organizing these other sort of like alternative space events. Like we just had one in LA that was called Trunk Show, which was curated by one of our members, Jackie Rhines. And people just drove their cars up and like displayed art on it, inside of it, around it. You know, they plugged in lights into their you know, their cigarette lighters and things like that. That's a big
summer for drive-through stuff, right?
Yeah. They just participated, to speak back to collaboration with a group of other galleries in the Bendix building, to do this drive-through art show where, you know, they sort of marked off this sort of like track where you can, you know, you drive your car through and you can sort of like, you know, it's kind of like a Disneyland ride or something where you see like different things on the way. And our Greenville location, they organized a sort of collection of artworks in people's yards in 3 different cities. And, you know, that's of course heavily inspired by Terrain Exhibitions in Chicago, and which was run by the late great Sabina Ott. So, you know, so I think for us, since our model is collaborative anyways, and the whole idea is that we're sort of working together and trying to do like weird things. Like it was kind of nice to be untethered from the grind of putting together shows like every single, I mean, you know, we're eager to get back into shows, and thankfully our New York and our LA, our Chicago space are open somewhat right now. But it's been kind of a refreshing experience for us in some ways.
Definitely. I love that. I wanted to sort of shift a little bit and and talk about, I mean, you can't exactly zoom out from a pandemic. If you could, you know, someone would have done it. I wish I could do it. But I sort of want to talk about like the gallerist strategies that they've been already using. Like our three gallerists on the panel today have in some form spent their careers building businesses that elevate diverse and nuanced rosters. So, you know, I wanted to just talk about what more can be done to continue this important work in the future, and looking to the future, what does the industry need to do to continue investing in artists in this way?
It's Karen. I personally feel that the art world needs to recognize that they have the keepers of the gates in the art world have locked out artists of color, Black artists, female artists, Latinx artists. And I think until they boldly step forward into the light and admit that this was done, then they will continue to hide it within their institutions. The museums will continue to hide it. The curators will continue to hide it. And I think the art fairs will continue to hide it. I don't think this is an art world problem. I think this is a human problem. And since humans run or are part of the art world, human beings need to address it. It is not some big boogeyman out there doing that.
Right.
The people that you look in the mirror that look the way I suggested, or the people doing that. And so that is something that I challenge and encourage those keepers of the gates to do, to continue to do, to establish committees that are watchdogs, that you have to account to this, to help aid in pushing forward and trying to avoid that. I think that we need to hold each other accountable, if that's one-on-one conversations, if it's just boldly stepping out via social media. Like here in the Bay Area, we had a major institution called out, people resigned, and I know that there's other institutions with these same people that have these attitudes. And until we do that, we are going to continue to have this racism that is prevalent. It is there, people. I don't care what you all say, it's there. I see it every day. The artists see it, the employees see it, the janitors see it, people in the parking lot see it. It reeks, and we have it. So let's address that. And then we can have a serious conversation about the art world being diverse as America starts to become more brown.
Yeah. Wow.
I 100% agree with everything you said, Karen.
I want to like applaud, so I'm going to.
Yeah.
I just want to.
I feel like. Oops,
oh yeah, sorry. Please go on.
Oh, sorry. I feel like, yeah, I 100% agree with everything you just said, Karen. I feel like in the art world in particular, we need to dismantle this this lie that any of us are operating with neutral taste, and instead we need to sort of call it out as sort of this white supremacist taste that we're all taught. You know, we need to. I really think we need to dismantle this idea that there's this singular canon, and I think that really has caused a lot of harm. You know, the idea that the art world is acting with any sort of neutrality at all is a complete lie. So I think that there needs to be. I mean, you know, it's like it's almost like I feel like too late for like people like me who sort of grew up reading white Western male thinkers and looking at white male painters mostly. You know, it's like it's hard to even if you like, as I've been doing over the years, trying to like re-educate myself, that scar tissue is still there. You know, so I feel like it really needs to, the educational system needs to really fundamentally change, and there need to be multiple canons, and they all need to be explored with the same amount of nuance that is given to the sort of quote unquote traditional Western canon. You know, and I feel like industry-wide, we really need to get more people of color into leadership positions, not in these sort of like token roles. Because if you're just sort of, you know, diversifying your roster and showing more Black and brown, yellow artists, it's really just sort of this like it's used so often as a sort of like life raft for white supremacy to continue. So you do just enough, but you don't change any of the structure. You know, you don't change any of the leadership. So it's just enough to not get like called out on like Instagram or in the press or something. You know, that's not enough, because that's what we've been trying for a long time, and it's clearly not working.
Well, I think we are in a moment where there's so much change happening that this is an enormous opportunity. You know, this has been a very important issue for my gallery for 20 years, but for 15 of those 20 years, it was very difficult to even talk about it, because inadvertently, when you would bring up the issue of diversity, let's say in your gallery's program, it somehow evolved into a conversation of quality. Somehow that was always a threat to the quality parameters that were established. And I am just so thrilled that right now there is the perfect situation where these conversations are being brought out in the open, and they're being addressed, and people are also being called out. And I also feel that this cannot be an issue just for galleries. It has to encompass the entire art world. It needs to encompass the institutions. The collectors need to rethink. The press needs to rethink. Every part of the art world needs to collaboratively address this issue, because not one element of the art world can solve it alone. The collectors need to rethink.
Yeah.
And the institutions need to rethink too. And for instance, in my gallery, what we feel we need to change is we need to apply the same ideas of diversity much more to our staff as well. So it needs to be across the board in all areas.
I mean, I would just echo what everybody's saying. I think coming from the museum world, of course, museums are going through a kind of reckoning, and there's a lot of discussion happening publicly around the problems institutionally with structural racism and sexism. And I think, you know, as Alex was mentioning, and Susanne was just getting at, that in many ways there's been long histories of commitments to diversity in your programmatic area. For certain institutions anyway, certainly not for all. Collecting, I think, is an area where that, now I no longer work in a collecting institution, but certainly there are real problems with histories of acquiring the work of people of color. And then of course, for staff, the staff perspective, I think what Alex was bringing up about the fact that oftentimes the people of color are in more entry-level positions, maybe mid-level, but when you start to get to the top, most large museums, the majority of those staff are white. And so, you know, I think smaller nonprofits and smaller museums, non-collecting and otherwise, really are the place where that tends to be different, and the makeup of the staff tends to be more diverse across all areas. And I think that we can serve as models to a certain extent for the larger institutions. And then I just, everyone's saying this, but I just think that it's so important that these conversations are happening right now, and that there do need to be mechanisms for a certain kind of accountability, whether it's within your own institution through committees of staff and board, or whether it's within the field where there are these organizations that are looking to galleries, looking to museums, and making sure that that conversation continues, and that you are making commitments to make change over time. I mean, I think it's very interesting to pivot back to galleries for a second, how few galleries are owned by people of color. And it just seems absolutely crazy. Sorry, this has motion sensitive lighting. Sorry, I just am sitting in the dark now. But anyway, that's a whole topic that we can go into, but one that I
And
think
it's,
is important.
I agree 100%. And I don't necessarily want to divert the conversation away from this topic at any time, but Anne, as the director of a museum and, sort of building off of what you were just talking about with, sort of like assessing your own institution and also having these important conversations more generally, what are your most personal pressing priorities looking forward when it comes to reassessing what a museum means to its community in 2020?
Well, I think the pandemic has, it has created a spotlight on a lot of issues. And I think it has, the positive side is that it has been a moment for us to all think deeply about the role of art in our communities and the role of our institutions within our communities, whether that's a local community or something more broad. And I think, for me, being relatively new to ICA LA as well, I just had my first year anniversary. So the pandemic hit just a few months into my new role. And, I was already thinking a lot about the past for this institution and what the future might hold. And then it just became, this very intense period of reflection. And one of the things that I think has felt really meaningful is that the pandemic almost becomes an excuse to have very intensive conversations with a whole range of people, whether those are foundation people, whether those are artists, collectors, board members, supporters in different ways, and to try to get to the heart, basically like back to basics. I thought a lot about why I wanted to be in the art world in the first place, why I wanted to be a curator, why I want to work in institutions, specifically museums. And in those low points where, as Alex was saying, you wonder whether it even matters, I really reconnected with the fact that I feel that art absolutely is essential.
Right.
And I feel very clear at this moment too, that it's going to be artists who help guide us forward as we evaluate what this pandemic, the impacts have been and what we're going through as a culture. And of course, also the revolution for racial equity that we're experiencing right now. And I do strongly feel that institutions and artists have a primary role to play. And I think that artists are often the most civically minded people in a community that you will find. They believe deeply in oftentimes the cities where they choose to live, the communities that they engage with. And I think that we need to look to them to help guide us. And it's been a moment, especially when we were closed. Of course, when you're closed, everyone's doing all these online this and that and expanding their digital profile, which has been interesting. But we found an opportunity in August to do a program that we called Field Workshop Action Projects. And we put out a call to artists to submit proposals for ways that they could use our space in small groups to workshop ideas, to hold conversations, to perform or actually make art if they chose. And we got the most incredible array of ideas coming from artists. And we spent about 5 weeks welcoming small groups of people into our space. And there was always a private part to those projects and then a public facing part that was usually a hybrid of people on site and then also digitally. And they were incredible and really made us feel even more committed and more connected to our community locally.
Great. To sort of do a meta commentary question on ideas and conversations, I wanted to ask Karen what the most important insight or series of insights you gained from the Conversations on Culture series that you curated and moderated were.
Thank you, Helen. Yes, Conversations on Culture we developed that in April, right? When we were trying to brainstorm about how we can bring the art audience into the gallery, bring collectors and audience into the galleries. And we wanted to build awareness. We wanted to have it to be a personal time where we can have discussions with artists, collectors, and curators about current art world topics and to make it personal. And that has happened. It's, could somebody bring up, I believe we had a PowerPoint sent to you guys. Did you guys?
Oh
get
yeah, I wanted to tell, we weren't able to do that, the images there.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay, so
Yeah, apologies for that one.
we've been in conversations with business people in the business world who are collectors, and they're providing advice on collecting, on how they just decide who they're collecting, giving their wealth stream. We've building awareness by having discussions with board members of institutions such as Eric McKissick with the art, sits on the board at the Art Institute of Chicago, and Tracy Reese at the Berkeley Museum, and Bernard Lunkin, who sits on various institutions, including the Studio Museum and Baron Channer. So what these has done is it's allowed people that would normally hear these conversations to learn more about the art world, to come back, like I said, to the galleries, to come back to the gallerists. So it used to be our job to educate collectors so that they know what's happening in the art world with artists and museums. And I think that the art fair took that from us. And I think Conversations on Culture has brought that home. You know, Toni Morrison said, talking about this is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. And that is what Toni Morrison said. That is what Conversations on Culture is doing. We are hitting the topics head on, discussing George Floyd. When John Lewis passed away, we spoke a little bit about that. We're get into good trouble on our Conversations on Culture, and we do it in a personal way.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Karen. To address my next question to Susanne, a little bit of a tone shift, but I wanted to ask you specifically about art fairs, which you'd already sort of brought up earlier in the conversation. But I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts and feelings on how art fairs will look in the coming year? Are they sustainable? Are online fairs sustainable? Yeah, specifically, are online fairs sustainable, or are people tired of them already?
Yeah, I think there's a great deal of screen fatigue and online viewing room fatigue going on. It is just not the same. And also, everybody, I think, knows that people are not only exclusively going to the art fairs to just look at images of or artworks. It's the social component, the saying hi, they're looking who's where and who has, where is, you know, that gallery's booth located, and the whole thing. All of these things are, of course, incredibly, you know, an important part of art fairs. And I mean, I cannot look into the future, but from what I see right now, in-person art fairs are unrealistic, I think, for at least another year, perhaps for 2 years. I think eventually I would hope that they can take place again, and they will. I think where they are really most important is in connecting the art world internationally and connecting institutions, connecting our artists to curators from international institutions and to collectors all over the world. And I feel an online art fair can just not effectively kind of continue that kind of momentum. So even I think most galleries are finding right now that they're not crying their eyes out over the loss of art fairs, because we do sell less, but also spend way less, which in recent years, at least for my gallery, that part has gotten way out of hand. But I think eventually the momentum will disappear if art fairs are not coming back. We will eventually contract to become a much more local art world, not all of which I feel is bad, but I do feel in the larger picture, it is good for the art world to be internationally connected. For right now, we actually try to see the best of it. And there was a colossal amount of waste that happened at the art fairs, just with shipping things across the globe, people traveling across the globe. And for us dealers, it very often meant like a frantic, never-ending cycle of fairs where what I regretted about it, and I think is a great opportunity to rethink the art world right now, is the art fairs are very much about the act of selling. And I feel like as a gallerist, that is, even though it is a very important part of what I do, it never was for me at the very heart of things. So in all of this frantically selling art across the world and schlepping it from one place to the other, very often the real conversations got lost. And these are not just conversations about the artwork with the collectors. These are also larger, deeper, more philosophical conversations about what is art for, or why are we collecting? Why are we looking at art? Or what is the relationship between the artist and the collector? And why are we selling it even? These conversations, there was just no time. There was not only no time to have them anymore, there was no time to actually think about those things anymore, because this art fair, I think the art fair thing got too big. And I wouldn't mind for it shrinking a little bit.
So this might be a time to kind of, step back and reassess, just like, what it is that we're all doing when our gallery networks and our galleries themselves are, like you said, shelling out so much money.
One more thing that needs to happen in the art fair world as well is a striving for more fairness and equity. It used to be that it was the majority of people on the selection committees were white men. It was very difficult, I remember, for me to even get into the best art fairs for many, many years. And in terms of racial diversity, there's none. So the art fairs have a long, long way to go when it comes to equity and inclusion and diversity.
And I just want to remind the audience that you can submit questions at the bottom of the screen to the Q&A function. Just want to put that reminder in there as we begin to draw to a close.
Can I insert follow-up?
Yeah, of course, please.
One of the things about the art fairs, which having been shut out for quite many, many years, and that you asked, I think somewhere along there, you asked Weinter, what is the barriers to entry for Black-run businesses, art galleries. The part of the issue here, Susanne, is the benefit that the people that have participated in the art fairs are benefiting right now to this day, at this moment, is they now have those collectors they have now accumulated and built up those collectors. They've accumulated and built up the contacts with the curators. So they have that wealth banked in their collector base, in their database, and they're able to pull upon that during this downturn in this pandemic. And they're able to call on those relationships. So this is part of the reason why my gallery, for instance, we lose out on artists that we want to represent because we couldn't get in and show them in the places where other people were able to. So of course they couldn't go with Jenkins-Johnson because we were held back from getting into the fair for whatever the reason or that it was presented to me, of which I'm not taking that bullshit anymore. So we lost out on very high profile artists that we incubated, and they went to the other galleries, and those other galleries are enjoying the revenue streams of those artists that we helped build. And that is something that needs to be recognized and acknowledged. And so that is why you're not seeing Black young gallerists come into the fold, because it's a financial structure, it's a capital structure, and it's
Exactly.
a support structure. And until something happens with these collaborative issues and we support those veterans and support them with cost reductions, it's just not gonna happen. This is a very, very expensive industry in which to operate. It takes a lot of capital. As Susanne was saying, all the money that we put out there for the art fairs, all the shipping costs, flying the staff and housing the staff, the per diems, the dinners and all that have to put on, it takes money. And until we figure out another course, it's gonna continue this way.
Yeah, and I think that it all raises a really important point about like these huge institutions that need to change and the power structures that need to be more equitably distributing revenue. You have to see, I think, some sort of relinquishment of power from the ones who have, like you said, Karen, accumulated so much. So I think that's something really important to think about as I just go into my final questions. Even though this panel is all about invigoration and restructuring and fundamentally having faith in the arts industry, which is something I think we've been talking about, I also think it's important to acknowledge worst case scenarios when considering our art industry's uncertain future. For each of you, what worst case scenarios within your corners of the art world are you consciously determined to avoid?
I can say something, but Alex, you haven't spoken in a while. Would you like to go first?
Thank you. Yeah, I was waiting for my question.
Oh,
I feel like my preference is just to see all the art fairs burn down. You know, it's like, why start from like -10 to try to go to 2 when we could just start over and start at 0? You know, it's like, why wait for these big power structures to change? Because I wouldn't hold my breath. Yeah. A lot of the power structures haven't changed in what, 600-700 years. So like I'm frankly more interested in projects that are sort of creating communities on their own terms and sort of rebuilding things on their own terms. That's kind of my take on art fairs, but you know, but also like I can easily like sort of like lob that grenade, because like our organization is not like financially tethered to that. You know, like I want folks to make a living, of course.
Yeah.
But I think it's like it's a big ask to ask this huge global power structure that has been like systemically against non-white folks to suddenly like see the light and give up power on their own.
Yeah.
Well, I could say from a gallerist point of view, the worst case scenario that I can envision is that in this very, very challenging time right now, that the young galleries and the mid-tier galleries eventually will not be able to make it, and that then all the power sits with the 4 or 5 big global galleries that have their spaces in London, Paris, Zurich, and New York, and where else. I think that would be an enormous loss for the art world. And before the pandemic hit, the art world was actually quite rapidly moving in that direction. And just to explain it in terms of the art fairs, in my opinion, were structured in such a way that the richest galleries or the biggest galleries had it the easiest, and the youngest had it the hardest. If you bring works that are selling at a price point of $2,000 each, then you had to sell 20, 30 works at an art fair just to break even. And if you sell works at 10 million price point, you sell one and you have made a big profit. And at the same time, we galleries, we prepay the art fair upfront, so the risk is all on our shoulders. And not only that, all the small and the young galleries basically financed the well-being of the large galleries, who were then also usually situated in the best places in the fair. And in the bigger picture, that is also how the art world from a gallery point of view operates. The younger galleries take all the risk. It takes years and years of financial investment to build a career of an artist, and then you watch how once they actually, that flips around and it goes from investment to revenue coming in for other artists, when the large galleries then pick the artists from the plum tree, so to speak. And I feel strongly, because I'm a hopeful person, that we are in a moment right now, since we're rethinking everything, we may as well rethink that as well. We will have to rethink it for the sake of a diverse and interesting art world, because if we don't, then the art world will be controlled by just 5 or 6 players. And if you consider that, and then understand where the art that you see in your local institution or museum is actually coming from, then you will see a connection between what's showing, what is being presented by the 5 players in the art world, and what you then afterwards will see in your local museum. And I think I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that we rethink this system at this very moment. A moment like this might not come along anytime soon.
So Susanne, I'm going to dovetail off that, but I have a question. Who's going to rethink that? Who's going to be, because the fish rots from the head. So who's going to be doing the rethinking? Who's doing this? So, until we identify those individuals and call them out, we're talking, we're having this nice rhetoric here. So until we actually say, you, come here, let's talk. I think we're going to continue with this. One of the things to answer, Helen, the question for me is, I think it's a very difficult time right now for artists. I think that artists in general, struggling artists, I don't care what level you are at, the emerging artists, the mid-career artists are, trying to figure out how to pay the rent, to put food on the table, how to buy shoes for Johnny, how to, get art supplies, And I think that we have to be very cognizant that we as gallerists watch out for them. We benefit from presenting their work to the public. We need to also make sure that they are financially stable at this time.
I'm just checking out the chat right here. Let's just see. So I think we've all been discussing towards the end of this, like some of the stuff that I have for the last final questions about, possibilities of recovery and invigoration, but it's also more about these systems that are so, immovable and oppressive sometimes. So I would want to sort of ask if there are any strategies anyone could really talk about how to be sort of like interconnected as we draw to a close here.
So I think that the sort of artist run model is an interesting one because it's based on this idea of creating community and mutual aid. So traditionally, there'll usually be a group of artists that are all chipping in both financially and both in terms of their labor administratively to run these organizations. And I feel like this sort of community-based and cooperative sort of cooperatively built organization is kind of really like one of the ways forward. Now the danger, I think, with artist run spaces is that oftentimes we don't question what are we trying to build, and we end up just replicating the white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal systems that we are also entrenched in, right? But if, you know, if more of these smaller spaces and experimental groups really sort of define like, okay, we're going to call ourselves an alternative space, but what are we an alternative to? And really kind of going back to what you were saying, Karen, like, you know, naming the people, naming the exact things that we are trying to be an alternative to, then I think that we can start building new structures and new communities. And the exciting thing about artist-run spaces is that we create this community, and you give artists a sense of agency to be able to both change the community outside of, you know, the group, and also to sort of help each other. And I feel like that's kind of like, I don't know, for me, that's what I find hopeful about.
No, Alex, thank you so much. I think that's so important to note, like, what are we trying to build that's alternative to what we know we don't want? And like asking those questions are just as important as knowing what to push against. So we're like a little over time here, but I just want to get in one audience question, which is, how can changes in art education play a role in supporting inclusion? I'm asking as an artist and educator working with K-12 students.
I feel like that's like a super fundamental question. Oh, I'm sorry, Karen.
Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Okay. I feel like that's a really fundamental question. Art education, I think, is the key, because that's where we form our earliest thoughts about taste and aesthetics. And you know, the art world is built around this whole like idea of gaslighting you into thinking that a certain type of taste is neutral and good, and other things are always seen through that gaze, right? So I think like these sort of like smaller alternative schools are really exciting, like the Black School in New Orleans. There's a new program called Dark Study, which I think is really interesting. I think there's a school, it's actually called the Alternative School, or Alternative Art School, perhaps. That's also really interesting. So I think that, I think like looking into these sort of structures that are creating alternative types of art education are really a great way to start.
Amazing.
I think on that note, it might be interesting to say that another system, art world system that needs to change is these horrendously expensive art schools. I think it's exclusionary. It perpetuates the same kind of dialogue and the same kind of exclusion of others right there from the start, and it needs to be addressed and it needs to be changed.
Well, incredible. I want to.
Helen, can I answer that?
Of course.
Yeah. I'm probably going to answer this from a different point of view. I agree with both what Alex and Susanne have said, but I believe that I think just arts education in general needs to be in place. Schools are eliminating art classes, they're eliminating gym. And a lot of the artists that I know I'm working with, they started out drawing at a very young age. Their parents or their grandmother or their grandfather encouraged them to draw. And from that encouragement, that gave them the hope and self-esteem to blossom into an artist. So that basic foundation is important, to know that art is actually something you can do, and you can do it your entire life, and you can have it as your career.
Incredible. I think we covered an enormous amount of ground in an hour. I'm just so proud to have been spending this time with you all. I want to thank Anne, Alex, Susanne, and Karen for joining us. And if you want to stay informed about future offerings from Observer, you can visit our website, businessofart.observer.com, for more information and a link to register for our newsletter. So that'll do it. And again, thank you so much for giving your time, energy, and efforts to this webinar.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen.
Take
Thank
care.
you so much for having us.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, really.